Hey everyone, welcome to the Neo4j stream. My name's Will, and today we are continuing working on our Gatsby, Neo4j, and GraphQL travel guide. So just picking up from where we left off last time, let's review just where we are at this point real quick. I'll drop the link to the GitHub repo in the chat. There we go. And where we left off last time, so we've been working on this travel guide application. If we look at the code, we can see there are basically two pieces to our application. We have the Neo4j Graphql API, and this is using the Neo4j Graphql.js package to build a GraphQL API talking to a Neo4j sandbox instance. So we're using the OpenStreetMap Neo4j sandbox instance. Let me drop a link to that in the chat as well. So this link will directly open an OpenStreetMap instance. Looks like there might be an issue with posting in the chat. Let's restart my chat app. Let's see here. Hopefully that helps. Let's try that again. Okay, here's the link to the Neo4j sandbox for OpenStreetMap. Hopefully you get that. Okay, so we have this Neo4j GraphQL API where we're basically exposing points of interest. You can see we have this point of interest type here, and this is running locally right now, so we can query that. So localhost 3003. That is an old query. Let's zoom in a little bit. You can see the entry points. We have point of interest. So I can search for point of interest by name. Look at the first three. I can retrieve any tags for the point of interest. And this tag data, this comes from OpenStreetMap. We also added pulling in data from Wikipedia. So we have a Wikipedia field there that I can pull in data from Wikipedia. And then we also have photos that we've added from Mapillary. Right, and we need to add latitude and longitude to our selection set if we want to use photos, because we are relying on our custom resolver, which we've defined here, to have access to latitude and longitude to call the Mapillary API. Okay, so we have that data for these points of interest. Last time we added the ability to do routing between points of interest. So if I also return the node OSM ID, so that's the ID referencing the point of interest. So let's copy this one. And now if I want to route from the Jacqueline Candido Nassus Reservoir to the, what was this one? The Conservatory Water. I can add that to the GraphQL selection set. And behind the scenes, we are using the Graph Data Science library. Here, the shortest path algorithm, which by default is Dijkstra's algorithm to find the shortest path between these 2 points of interest in Central Park. So we have that data in a GraphQL API that we've exposed. And what we want to do is pull that into Gatsby. So we have a separate project here, which is our Gatsby application, which also should be running, have that running in this tab here. So Gatsby uses a GraphQL API to pull in all of its content. And so we can see here, if we look at the Gatsby GraphQL API, that we have stitched in our GraphQL API that we've exposed from Neo4j under this POI field. So here, under the POI query field, we have the point of interest field available, which is basically just running queries against this GraphQL API. So Gatsby makes it really easy if you have data in a GraphQL API to pull that in. We're using the, we look in the Gatsby config, we're using the Gatsby source GraphQL, I think it's called. Yeah, here it is. The Gatsby source GraphQL plugin to essentially stitch in our own GraphQL API into the Gatsby API, which we can then use to populate our site. So we started off with the Gatsby starter blog, which is why this kind of looks like we expect to see a list of blog posts here. And when we click on one of these, we see details for the point of interest we selected. These are the tags that we have from OpenStreetMap. And then we have the data that we pulled in from Wikipedia for each of our points of interest. Cool. So that's where we left off. The last session was all about efficient routing with graph algorithms. So we took a look at Cypher shortest path. We took a look at the algorithms in the Graph Data Science library for routing, so Dijkstra and A* specifically. And we took a look at the NeoMap graph app for Neo4j Desktop that allows us to visualize spatial data. So the recordings are available here. Again, I'll link the GitHub repo in the chat. Cool. So what I want to do today is take a look at how we can deploy our application. And I thought this would be a good time to look at a brand new product from DigitalOcean that was released just a couple days ago, earlier this week, called DigitalOcean App Platform. So what we're going to do today is see how we can use this new DigitalOcean App Platform service to deploy both our Neo4j GraphQL API and then also to deploy our Gatsby site. So with that, let's dive right in. Cool. So we have our site running locally, both the Neo4j GraphQL API and the Gatsby project. And what we want to do is deploy this somewhere so that it's accessible from some domain. So we're going to take a look at this new DigitalOcean app platform, which if we look at the announcement blog post, let me link the announcement blog post in the chat there. Basically, what this is sort of a managed solution for building and deploying applications that basically gives you platform-specific containers. So it looks like we can connect GitHub repositories, does some detection if, hey, is this a Node.js app? Is this a static site? And then allows us to deploy those as web services or static sites, which we can then scale up and down as we need. And there's a fixed cost with these. So as kind of the opposite direction of serverless, where we're sort of, our costs are dependent on usage, where we're sort of paying per invocation. It looks like with App Platform, we have a fixed understood cost. And I guess as we scale our application, adding more containers, then I guess the cost goes up linearly there, perhaps. So I should say I don't know much about this service yet. It just came out a couple days ago, but I like DigitalOcean, so let's give it a try. So I'm going to sign into my DigitalOcean account. Here, cool. Looks like I'm already signed in. These are my projects. I'm interested in apps. So select apps, there we go. And it says launch your app. Let's maybe let's bring up the documentation /docs. So if you're not familiar with DigitalOcean, DigitalOcean is a cloud provider. So you can think of something like what AWS or Google Cloud Platform or Azure, right? So a cloud platform along those lines. And I think DigitalOcean has focused on sort of developer simplicity. So they don't have as many services as AWS, right? I mean, AWS has a service for pretty much everything. But if you've ever used the AWS console or the AWS CLI, there can be a bit of a overhead in understanding how to properly use those services. Whereas DigitalOcean's approach, I think, has been, let's limit the number of services, number of offerings that we have, but let's focus on just really a dead simple developer experience. So a very sort of friendly to use cloud service is maybe a way to think of DigitalOcean. So I think when I first started using DigitalOcean, the only service they had were droplets, which are sort of VPSs, so virtual private servers. They've since added several other services, including block storage, Kubernetes, so we can create Kubernetes clusters on DigitalOcean. They now have a managed database service, and then the newest product that they have as of this week is App Platform. Cool. From the chat, what a coincidence. Actually planning on setting up Neo4j today. Great. To work with my Flask app on DigitalOcean. Flask running, just need to set up and connect it to Neo4j. Cool. Great. Yeah, I think for development, you might want to think about initially just connecting that to Neo4j Sandbox, which Sandbox instances only live for initially 3 days. You can extend them up to a week, I think. But it's an easy way just to get started. And then Neo4j Aura is a managed Neo4j service that you might also be interested in, that allows you to basically just click a couple of buttons and have a Neo4j cluster deployed and managed for you. Later on in the stream, I think we'll take a look at how we can deploy a Neo4j cluster ourselves. Maybe using the DigitalOcean Kubernetes service. That might be something interesting to look at. But for today, we'll focus on deploying our GraphQL application and the Gatsby site, since we already have the Neo4j instance that we want to use in Neo4j Sandbox. Cool. So with App Platform, if we look at the quick start here, basically what we do is point it at a GitHub repository. It does some inference then to figure out what type of project we have. We can scale it, deploy it, set up a custom domain, and so on. So there's lots of different languages and frameworks. We can even just write our own Docker file if we want to deploy that. Let's look at concepts. So we can come back to this if we need to, but I think basically what's going on here is our application is getting its own container, or maybe multiple containers here, and we're sort of configuring how we want our application to be built. Yeah, and as you're pointing out in the chat, Abdul, yeah, they only support GitHub currently. I saw though that the plans are to add GitLab and other hosted Git services as well. So I think that's on their roadmap. I'm sure there are some initial features they wanted to roll out, but since this just launched a couple days ago, there may be some things not quite included yet. So we'll see what we can find today. Okay, so there's the docs if we need to check those out. But let's go ahead and launch an application. And so let's see. I can choose a repository. I've already connected my GitHub user, so that's cool. I can dig into that. Let's choose a demo application to launch here initially before we try to deploy our Gatsby project, just to see how this works. So we'll choose the Node.js project, give it a name, choose a region, assuming this is pointed at some template GitHub project. Yep, Node.js, okay, cool. That's the Webpack you'll use, I guess, or the build. What's the right terminology there? The build pack. That's what right. So the build pack defines the language and framework and how it gets built. Many of which came from Heroku. Yeah, makes sense. Okay, so web service or static site. This is a web service. You can pass environment variables. Build command we don't need to worry about. Not going to connect database. Let's give that a deploy. So because this is a web service, it's not on the free tier. So it looks like the free tier is just for static content. Okay. So this is going to be basic. We can just do one container. We can choose the size of the container. Let's choose the smallest and give that a deploy. So this is just going to deploy whatever the sample application is. While this is building, let's take a look at the logs. So Node.js build pack, installing some packages, and building a Docker container, it looks like. What else do we have to look at here? So an overview, so we can look at some metrics once it's deployed. Insights, I guess these are the metrics, yeah, that we don't have any data for since it hasn't been deployed yet. History of our deployments. No runtime logs because we're still deploying. Yep, no console. Okay, the components. So scaling, so here I guess we can add more containers, environment variables, HTTP routes we want to expose. Yeah, the health checks. Yeah, so the health checks, this is important, I guess, when we have multiple containers. So when we're scaled horizontally, I guess, we have multiple containers. There's some load balancer here that's sending health checks to the different containers to make sure that the container is online and healthy before sending it a request, which makes sense. The commands to build and start it, and then the HTTP port. So this is going to be whatever port our service application is listening on. This is going to be routed to 443 or 80 for the public request. Okay, it says it's deployed. Let's take a look. So we get our own subdomain on the DigitalOcean.app domain. Cool. So I guess this is going to be specific for each one of our deployments, which is nice. So other services have this, this sort of preview deploy where we can trigger a deployment based on some pull request or maybe some specific branch, and then share that with our boss or with someone who doesn't want to build the whole application just to see how it works. The other thing that's really nice here is we get the certificates managed for us. So we get a HTTPS endpoints. Yeah, and as you're pointing out in the chat, Abdullah, very similar to Heroku. Yeah, it's a good observation. So this app looks like it's generating random words. If I refresh, do I get different content? No. Okay, cool. We can, now that we have it running, do we see runtime logs? Yes. So there's the app starting, some ASCII art, and then the logs. If we go to the console, maybe we can see, yeah, there we go. So this is basically giving us a terminal in the container. Can take a look at the README. Yeah, so this is how to deploy this as an app. Can we look at the code? So app.js, index.js. Let's see what this is. So this is an Express app, mounting some logging, and index router. There's also a user's route. Oh, that's commented out. Okay, so the index router, where does that come from? Routes index. Routes index.js. Oh yeah, here we go. Here's our bunch of functions to randomly generate some words. Oh yeah, and this is cool. So we have list of adverbs, adjectives, verbs. Okay, cool. And so we're sort of randomly selecting from like noun, adjective, noun, adverb, verb kind of thing for sentences. Okay, that's clever. Cool. Okay, so neat. Let's deploy our Gatsby application. So let's create app, choose a repository. So I've already authorized GitHub. So I have it in the central perk repo. And yep, we can call it central perk. Region is fine. There's only one branch. Auto deploy code changes. This is really nice. So this allows us to do sort of Git ops where we push up something to GitHub in this case, and then that triggers a deployment. Cool, that's nice. Okay, configure your app. App detection failed. We're sorry, but weren't able to detect anything that the app platform can currently run in the repository you selected. Please try a different repository. Okay, so I think what's going on there, if we look at our code, here, we kind of have two separate applications in here, right? So the terminology for what you would call this is, I guess, a mono repo, where we have one repository that has our Neo4j GraphQL API code. So this is a Node.js Express application, well, a Node.js application at least, serving a GraphQL endpoint. And then we have kind of a separate project that is our Gatsby project. So it looks like we can't point at a specific folder and say, hey, deploy this separately, that instead we need separate repository. So let's break these out into two repositories. I guess we could also, if we look here for what languages and frameworks are supported, I guess we could write our own Docker file and use that to deploy both of these maybe. I don't want to do that. So let's create a new repo. And we'll call this Central Perk API. And upload existing file. Ooh, can we just be lazy and do this from the web? Let's see. Choose files. Central Perk. Gatsby site. Just these. I guess I don't have a README. That's fine. So I'm just pulling out our Neo4j GraphQL project from inside our mono repo. Pushing those up. Commit failed. Oh no. What happened there? GitHub, Central Perk. Maybe we can't just do it from the web UI. Not sure. I've never actually uploaded files. Call this initial commit. Never uploaded files like this in GitHub before. Okay, cool, that worked. Let's add a README. Can add some content to that later, that's fine. Yeah, so some discussion in the chat about Heroku. Yeah, definitely used Heroku before for lots of projects. Pluses and minuses there. Yeah. Okay, so do we need to do anything else here to try to deploy the API part of our application? I don't think so. I think we can go back to DigitalOcean and try a different repository. Do you have, let's see, does it find, let's start this again, so maybe it needs to refresh my GitHub repo since I just created a new one. Actually, what did I call it? Central Perk API. Did I give it access to all repos? Yes. Central Perk API. So just fiddling with the GitHub permissions there. Okay, there it is. This is the one I want to deploy. Region, actually, what regions are available? Okay, so New York or a couple in Europe. Okay. Main branch, auto deploy. Yes, we want to do that. Okay, so now it says this is a Node.js app, web service. Yes, since this is going to be a GraphQL API. And now we do need to add some environment variables. So if we look here, we have some environment variables to connect to our Neo4j sandbox instance. So we want Neo4j URI is this. And then for Neo4j user, let's create a read-only user. So I'm going to switch to our sandbox instance and jump into Neo4j browser. So the user that we get here in the sandbox UI and our connection details, this is an admin user, but let's create a read-only user so that when we deploy this, someone can't mess around with our data. So colon server user add. What should we call this? Let's just username OSM for OpenStreetMap. And we'll give it just the role of reader. So the only thing this user will be able to do is read data from the database. So if we go to Neo4j user is OSM, Neo4j password is OSM, and then the mapillary key is this. So the mapillary key we're using to fetch photos from the mapillary API build command. There's no build command since we're not using any transpilation or anything. npm start, I think if we look at package.json, npm start, yeah, this should really be start dev or something. So we're doing nodemon. Nodemon is good for watching. So if we make some changes to a file, it will restart. But we don't need to do that here. It can actually kind of slow things down for a deployed app. So we can just do node index.js. And then the HTTP port, so this is the port that our GraphQL server is listening on that then gets routed to the request coming in on 443 or port 80 that the load balancer is taking care of. I think we hard coded this in our application. Yeah, so we hard coded this to listen on port 3003. So we will listen on port 3003. Okay, I think that is all the configuration we need to do. So what's the difference between basic and pro here? So per minute application metrics. Okay, so if we do pro, we get more metrics, horizontal scaling. So I'm guessing adding containers, high availability. Oh, so we can have multiple instances of our container, and then it's highly available because if one goes down, the load balancer will route to the other one. Okay. Oh yeah, let's go ahead. We'll take this down in a second. Let's go ahead and select Pro, and sure, let's go all out, and we'll set up 3 containers that are going to serve our API. Why not? Okay, so if we take a look at the logs, we've got the environment variables, installing some packages, and uploading our Docker image. Okay, let's build our image. While we're waiting, is there anything in the docs about the architecture that this runs on? I'm curious. I imagine there's some sort of Kubernetes architecture under the hood here that's supporting all of this. Oh, there's also a command line tool. That's interesting. Doctal. Oh, cool. So we can create our apps from the command line as well. That's nice. That's handy. But what did I say? I want to know how this runs under the hood. Oh yes, this is a good point. So when should I not use app platform? App platform is optimized for ease of deployment. Yep, that makes sense, rather than deep customization of the underlying infrastructure. If you require more control over your production environment, think about using DigitalOcean Kubernetes, which we talked about, or your own droplets, your own VPSs. Yeah, okay, makes sense. Choose the limits. Okay, cool. Let's see if that's deployed. Deploy successful. Okay, cool. So here's the URL for our GraphQL API. Take a look at GraphQL Playground. We have points of interest, name, type, location. Great. Cool, so that works. Excellent. The next thing we want to do is deploy our Gatsby site and point it at this API. Which I guess we need to create a new app to do that. And we need a new GitHub repository. So I don't think our mono repo approach is going to work with app platform, at least for now. That's fine. We can create central perk Gatsby. And can we upload our files again? Let's try this because I'm lazy. Oh, I don't want. Some of these are. I don't want to check in node modules, and some of this is built as well. Yeah, let's not be lazy. Let's do this on the command line. So let's copy Gatsby site to a new directory. What do we call this? Central perk Gatsby. We'll copy that out of our mono repo, and then we'll create a new Git repo locally, make a commit, and then push that up to our new GitHub repo. And then we should be able to deploy that on App Platform. Yeah, so it's interesting if looking at App Platform, if you look at some of the other similar services, folks are comparing this to Heroku, which I think is a good one. If you look at some of the newer services like Netlify or Vercel, which are very much focused on certainly static content, for sure. We can deploy static sites on Netlify, and then there's a Netlify CDN, but we can also do serverless things as well. So with Netlify functions, we can deploy serverless functions. In one of our previous projects on the stream, if you remember, we deployed this on Netlify. This was Willow, which was our real estate search app. And we deployed this on Netlify using a Lambda function for our GraphQL API, which is in here. Source functions. Right. So here we use Apollo Server Lambda to do this on Netlify, which doesn't allow us to deploy arbitrary containers, but does give us the ability to deploy functions. So in this case, we're deploying a container on App Platform, which is serving Express app. So I wonder how we could do sort of the equivalent sort of functions as a service on DigitalOcean. I guess that doesn't fit into their current product offering. Maybe I haven't looked at that enough. Anyway, okay, we've copied those files, so let's cd to GitHub, Johnny Montana, Central Perk Gatsby, create a new Git repo, add everything, git commit, initial commit, and connect that to GitHub. And push it up. And there it is on GitHub. It still has the README for the blog starter. That's fine. Okay, cool. So now let's jump back to app platform, create app, and oh yeah, I need to change GitHub permissions because I only gave it access to one repository. Let's add central perk Gatsby. And we want to deploy central perk Gatsby. Yep, region's fine, name is fine, auto deploy, there's only one branch. Great. And cool, so Gatsby detected. So if we look at the docs, languages and frameworks, I guess Gatsby is one of these build packs that it has. Yep, neat. So it knows how to build Gatsby sites out of the box. That's nice. Okay, environment variables. Do we need to set any environment variables? Well, if we look at our Gatsby site and in Gatsby config, here, so I mentioned earlier that we're using Gatsby source GraphQL plugin to stitch in the Neo4j GraphQL API, and we just have that hard coded here. So we want to change this to an environment variable that we can specify via an environment variable what API to pull in. Let's just change this on GitHub to make this easy. And Gatsby config, edit, and here we want this to be process.env dot, let's call it Neo4j GraphQL API. Looks good. So then environment variables will specify Neo4j GraphQL API, and that is going to be this URL. It's important to note, I guess, that this URL is specific for this deployment. I'm assuming if I do a new deployment, I get a different URL, where maybe where this hash changes. So we should think about setting up a custom domain for our API so that this will live through multiple deployments. I don't know, I'm just assuming that's specific to this deployment. I'll have to check that. But anyway, I think that's the only environment variable we need. So let's go ahead and deploy this. Static content is free. That's nice. Up to 1 gig outbound and 100 build minutes. Okay. Cool. Let's launch that. Okay, so that's running. You can look at the logs and watch it build. Oh, that's the runtime logs. Here's the build logs. It's just going to install a bunch of packages and build our project. While this is building, let's take a look in the console at our API application. And let's see what we can see here. So if we look at the insights, let's see what kind of metrics we get. Let's narrow this down a bit. So the last hour, you can see, so remember we deployed 3 containers. So we have 3 instances, Central Park API 0, 1, and 2. So 3 containers hosting our application. So there's a load balancer somewhere that is routing requests, assuming some sort of round robin. So that's a nice way to scale our GraphQL application. Ingress, bandwidth, average latency. I guess there are not many requests coming in. But that's neat. Okay, let's see if our Gatsby app is built yet. Central Park Gatsby. Still building. Yep. Okie doke. Back to our API app. Okay, so we looked at the insights, deployments, our history of deployments, the logs. So looks like it's taking the logs from each instance and just dumping those all in here. Oh, I guess what we should have done is started this in dev mode. So we could see the generated cipher queries. Let's see if we can set that up to work. So the way that we enable dev mode is by setting an environment variable. Where do we set our environment variables? Deploy settings. Is that in deploy settings? No. Domains. Oh, this is how we change domains. App spec. Yeah, so here's our, what is this, some YAML? Oh, so this is the actual configuration. Okay, how do we edit that? Oh, use to edit advanced settings. How do we edit that? Manage components? Yeah, there we go. Okay. So for environment variables, so I think we say dev equals Neo4j Graphql JS. And that will enable debug mode for Neo4j Graphql JS. And that will then log the generated cipher queries for us, at least. That's something we can see in the logs. And changing that looks like triggered a new deployment. Cool. So while that's deploying, so I guess my question is this still running? Oh yes, tags needs key and value. So yeah, so it's deploying a new instance of our application, but our old one still lives on while that's being deployed. Good, that's what we want. Okay, let's check in on Gatsby. And if we look at deployments, Oh, we got an error. Okay. What is the error? Cannot query fields on type markdown remark. Well, markdown remark, this is the markdown processor that we aren't using anymore. So we started with the Gatsby blog starter, which was pulling content from markdown files, but we took that out. So we shouldn't be querying anything related to markdown remark. I thought we had taken all that out. Oh, Gatsby plugin feed. Oh, okay. So Gatsby plugin feed, I think, is what is generating our RSS feed. Yeah, so Gatsby plugin feed is going to generate an RSS feed for our application. The reason we weren't getting this error when we were running Gatsby develop locally, I guess, is this probably only is touched when we do Gatsby build. Yeah, plugin only generates the XML file when run in production mode, and we haven't run this in production mode yet. So that explains why we didn't get that error. Let's just remove this because we don't need an RSS feed since we're building a travel guide. So let's go ahead and remove this. We'll just edit this on GitHub directly since we can do that. Gatsby plugin feed, if we just delete this from Gatsby config, I think that will address our issue. And we can also test if that triggers a new deployment. Yep, cool, that triggered a new deployment. Cool, let's check on that new deploy of our API. So we updated app spec, yep, so we enabled debug mode. Oh, interesting, we don't get a different URL, do we? This stays the same. So Central Park API 7 NDM 8. 7 NDM 8. Yeah, interesting. Okay, so I was wrong. I was thinking we would get a new URL for each deployment, but looks like we don't. Okay, that's fine. So if you take a look at the logs, we should see a couple of messages here saying that GraphQL API is ready, listing on port 3003. But then as we run GraphQL queries, the Neo4j Graphql JS library, that's sort of the core library that is running our GraphQL server, which is doing two things really. One, I guess, is it augments the GraphQL schema. So when we go from the GraphQL type definitions, if we take a look at the code here for our Neo4j Graphql API, we go from these type definitions, which can include some fields where we've attached a Cypher query to add custom logic with the Cypher schema directive. So here for Wikipedia, this is kind of fun. We're using a Cypher procedure, APOC load JSON, to go out to the Wikimedia API to grab some data for that point of interest, so some custom logic. But basically, we don't have to write any resolvers for data that we're fetching from the database. So when we're searching for points of interest by location, type, and so on, you'll note the only resolver we wrote is the one to call out to the Mapillary API. So that make augmented schema function from Neo4j Graphql JS is taking care of all of the logic for fetching data from the database. So the main backbone of our GraphQL API is this Neo4j Graphql JS library. But anyway, what we want to see here, let's maybe refresh this log view. What we want to see here, now that we enable debug mode is the generated Cypher queries for each request, for each GraphQL request that we make. So that library is translating these GraphQL requests into data fetching code in Cypher that then hits Neo4j. Looks like you can't see the logs right now. We'll come back to that in a sec. It's fine. So is Gatsby still deploying, or did we encounter an error? So the first one aired out. That was the RSS feed plugin that was trying to access some fields that we had removed. Since we switched to all of the content being populated from our Neo4j Graphql API instead of from Markdown files. And we're still building the new deployment. Let's see where we are in that process. Cool, looks like we're done with that, and we've generated our static content. Now it's look like this is our static files are being uploaded to the CDN, which I'm assuming is Cloudflare. Cool, so that should be online soon. Let's jump back to our API application, take a look at those logs. Okay, looks like we might not be able to see the logs there. Let's check in on the Gatsby deploy. Cool, we're still uploading our static content. There we go. So we generated 481 files. Most of those are the HTML for our individual point of interest pages. Okay, says we are online, deployed successfully. Have our own subdomain. Here's all of our list of point of interests. We select one. We see, cool, our photo from Mapillary, our tags that come from Neo4j, which come from the OpenStreetMap data set, and then pulling in data from Wikipedia. Cool, so that is our application. That's what we want to see. Great. So we've deployed this using DigitalOcean app platform. We had to deploy 2 applications here since it didn't look like we could use a monorepo. If anyone knows how to use monorepos with app platform, let me know and we can update our deployment to use that. But we deployed one application that was our GraphQL API, and then the other is our Gatsby project with our static content, pulling in content from that GraphQL API. Neat. Let's see, what else do we want to do? Oh, I guess it would be nice to have a custom domain. How do we set that? So instead of central perk Gatsby on DigitalOcean.app, maybe we want, I don't know, like centralperk.grandstack.io, something like that. How do we set that up? If we go to settings, components, is it in settings? I'm sorry. Oh yeah, domains and certificates, cool. Add domain. So domain and subdomain, we want this, let's say centralperk.grandstack.io. and it tells me to create a CNAME record on my DNS provider. I think GrandStack we have set up on Netlify for the DNS provider. So let's add that. Domains, yeah, GrandStack DNS record. And what did it say? It said add a CNAME alias. So central perk is the subdomain, and then the value. Where was that? That was here. The CNAME alias we want. So we'll create that and then add the domain. So now let's try that. centralperk.grandstack.io. Uh-oh. Error 1001. Could take a few minutes for the website's information to be distributed. Yeah, fair enough. We just created this DNS entry, so maybe we need to wait a second. For that to populate. Cool. Well, that, I guess, is a quick look at DigitalOcean's new app platform. If anyone has any suggestions for something else to look at here with the app platform, feel free to send any ideas. But I think we accomplished what we wanted to. So we deployed our GraphQL API application, and we deployed our Gatsby application, pulling in data from the GraphQL API, which I think is what we wanted to do for today. So yeah, let's wrap it up there. We deployed our application, we set up a custom domain, and now we can share that with the world. Next time, I do want to get to adding some maps to our application, both here on the index page and then for each individual page, just to show where it is in Central Park, and then to take advantage of the routing functionality that we added last time. So now that we know how to deploy our application, I think that is the big missing feature and missing functionality that we want to add, which we'll take care of next time, looking at map components. If anyone has an opinion on what map components for React to use, or specific to Gatsby, if there's some map plugin for Gatsby specifically, I'm not sure. We've used previously a couple of different wrappers, I guess, React component wrappers around the Mapbox's WebGL, Mapbox.GL.js. But if anyone has any opinions for looking at a different React-based map component library or mapping specific to Gatsby, let me know. And ping me on Twitter, which my Twitter handle, because it's on the screen there, LionWJ. I'll drop a link to that in the chat. So definitely let me know what map component you'd like to explore, and we'll pick that up next time. Cool. So thanks for joining today, and we'll see you again next week. So we do these streams live every Thursday at 2 p.m. Pacific. I should point out it's not just that time. That's my time slot specifically, but there's some other folks that stream on the Neo4j Twitch stream to find our schedule there. Yeah, here's the schedule. So if you go to our Twitch stream, if you're watching on YouTube and not on the Twitch stream right now, you can see the schedule. We usually have Adam looking at building applications with Neo4j, Lou, who tends to look at digging into specific data sets and covering some of the This Week in Neo4j articles, and then Michael on Wednesdays digging into all kinds of various topics. I think the last thing Michael looked at was the FinCEN files in Neo4j, applying some graph data science algorithms to them. So definitely check out some of those other time slots on the stream. You can find all the recordings on the YouTube channel for Neo4j as well, which I will also link. Cool, that's all from me today. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.